News just coming in. The United States of America has told its non-emergency staff in Karachi and Lahore to leave. The US State Department says it has ordered non-emergency personnel assigned to consulates in Pakistan's Karachi and Lahore to leave the country with their families. The US said there is no change to the status of its embassy in the capital, Islamabad. Aditya Rajkol still live with us from Israel. Aditya, precautionary measures being taken, and this comes after you've had the US also come out and say that there's very little they can do when it comes to some of the spaces where the embassies are in terms of pushing their people out.
It's a big development coming in, Vedika. This is from Pakistan. This is one country outside the Middle East where trouble has been looming large for the United States. And might I say, this is Trump's favorite country, Pakistan, that we are talking about, where he doesn't seem to have any problem. But now the US Department of State has issued a notification asking the non-emergency staff and their family members to move out and evacuate urgently from the US consulate in Karachi and in Lahore as well. Over the last 3 days, we have seen violent protests in Karachi and Lahore against the US consulate. You would remember that a huge group of protesters violently had attacked the US consulate in Karachi. In fact, in protests all across Pakistan against US and Israel, till now 24 people have been killed. In Karachi alone, where the US Marines were forced to fire towards the protesters, there were 11 protesters at least who had died and more than 100 who were injured in these US Marine firing that had taken place at the US consulate. There's no change as of now in the US embassy in Islamabad. It is being protected and heavy security has been given by the paramilitary and the Pakistani forces out there to the US embassy in Islamabad. But now in Karachi and in Lahore, there is a security crisis for the US, and that's why non-emergency staff and their family members have been asked to evacuate. In Israel as well, there was a notification issued yesterday where the ambassador had clearly said that they are not in a position to ensure the safety of the US diplomats and their family members, and hence the non-emergency staff needs to evacuate. Similar scenes from Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain and other places also where non-emergency, non-essential staff has been asked to move out. This also comes at a time when the Iranian missiles, the ballistic missiles have hit and the drones have hit several US consulates and US bases across the Middle East, even as the confrontation continues.
Stay with me. I have Managing Editor Shiv Arur also joining me from the newsroom. Shiv, this is the first area outside the Middle East where you have the US asking its non-emergency staff to leave.
Frankly, I'm a little surprised, Vedika, that it took so long for the United States to actually issue this order, given that over 20 people were killed, by US Marines as they stormed the US consulate in Karachi 2 days ago. It was one of the most violent incidents. Multiple gunshots happened. This huge Pakistani mob attempted to storm the Karachi consulate, and you saw what happened. It was a very, very violent, ugly scene, and over 20 people killed as a result of their attempt to take over the US consulate was something out of the series Homeland, where a very similar thing actually does happen. So for the United States to be reacting 2 days later and finally waking up to the fact that its staff are actually at risk in its consulate in Lahore and Karachi is a tad bit surprising. But I would also put that down to perhaps assurances made by the Shehbaz Sharif government, that people in these consulates would be safe. But clearly Trump is taking no chances. The State Department of the United States is clearly taking no chances with a country like Pakistan, which has never been able to completely, reassure outsiders. It has never been able to completely keep people safe on its soil. And therefore, this a terrible incident in which over 20 Pakistani citizens had to be gunned down by US Marines because they were simply physically threatening staff and trying to enter that consulate has meant that this is an unprecedented step the US has taken. And you're right that unlike in the Gulf, where the threat to those embassies and consulates is from Iranian missiles, here it is from one of America's major non-NATO allies. Pakistan is a major non-NATO ally, and Pakistani people are threatening American staff. That is what the world has come to. I wonder if this will have an echo diplomatically speaking as well. well, but a huge slap in the face of Pakistan that the United States is asking its non-emergency staff to leave from these two key cities. I'm wondering whether Islamabad will be next, Vedika.
Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture here. We're not only talking about the embassies in the Middle East that have been impacted, some of them also being told their staff as well as US nationals, we can't help you find your way out. Now we're seeing this happening in Pakistan, where you have the US embassy asking non-essential staff to move out. The question I have for you then is, did the US really have a roadmap when they went into this conflict, given that we're seeing the repercussions on the ground for US nationals?
You're asking the question, Vedika, that virtually every strategic affairs analyst is asking at this point of time. Companies that do global trade and economics are paying analysts millions of dollars to give them, an understanding that can answer precisely that question. Did America have a roadmap as to what to do next? Did they expect this conflict to last this long? Wasn't a decapitation strike meant to be, a very lightning quick combat operation without dragging on for so long? Today we're into the 5th day of this conflict. The ambit of the conflict is spreading, as we can see in Pakistan as well. Every single Gulf state is directly affected by the combat. Lebanon is about to be invaded from the ground by Israel, making this one of the biggest conflagrations in the Middle East in living memory, even compared to what happened in the 1980s. And therefore, Trump talking about, mocking Iran yesterday and saying that, they are no longer in a position to surrender because we've got this under control. The fact that since last night, combat operations have significantly increased, Vedika, with much more, airstrikes, many more airstrikes actually happening inside Iran.
Yes.
The message conveyed to me, at least from all this distance away, is that I think the attackers may have underestimated Iran's capacity to hit back and the ability to make the combat actually last this long with a semblance of command and control as far as the Iranian military is concerned. So the echo you're seeing in Pakistan and elsewhere is clearly just a sign of that.
All right, thanks for joining me live there, Shiv and Aditya. Moving on now.